I mean, you also mentioned fasting potentially through this 2-day thing. It'd be cool to get your thoughts about fasting in general. Do you think uh, on a personal level and at a higher sort of level of studies that you're aware of and physiology and so on, what do you think about intermittent fasting of like not eating for 16 hours and then having an 8-hour window, or something I've been doing a lot recently, which is eating only once a day? So that's 24-hour fast, I guess, one meal a day, or something I've been thinking about doing, haven't done yet, of doing like 72 hours, or some people do like 5-day fasts in general. So this would be, for this particular run, would be a 48-hour fast if I don't eat at all. What do you think about that for performance, for mood, for all those kinds of things?
I can speak a little bit to the science and a little bit of my own experience, and then some anecdotes of people that have done very hard, very long duration things and what they've told me. So I just want to make sure I'm separating those out so people know my sourcing. I think now none of this is about the actual long-term nutritional benefits of one thing or the other. But if you look at the science on intermittent fasting, it's pretty remarkable. Before I was at Stanford, my lab was in San Diego. One of my colleagues was Sachin Panda at the Salk. He's phenomenal biologist and researcher, wrote a book called The Circadian Code. It's very, very good, and kind of popularized intermittent fasting, although there were others that had talked about this before. Ori Hofmeckler talked about the warrior diet. People probably might not know who Ori is, but he's sort of the originator of this business of intermittent fasting, eating once a day or limited. Anyway, Sachin has published papers, peer-reviewed papers in very good journals like Cell and elsewhere, showing that limiting the consumption of calories to 8, 4, 6, or 8, or even 10 hours of every 24-hour cycle, and keeping that more or less correlated with the light, with when the sun is out, leads to less liver disease, improved metabolic markers, less body fat, et cetera. In the mouse studies, they even gave the mice the choice to eat whatever they wanted, as much as they wanted, as long as they restricted it to a certain period within the 24-hour cycle. They did great. They maintained a healthy weight or even lost weight when they took the same amount of food and they stretched it out across the entire 24-hour cycle. So this is eating every hour or 2 hours. The animals got fat and sick. So it's pretty remarkable data. How much of that translates to humans isn't clear, but one thing that's really clear with humans is adherence, right? We could talk a lot about nutrition, and some of the problems with the studies on nutrition is that what people will do in a laboratory is often hard to do in the real world. Low carbohydrate diets, because they tend to focus on foods that have high amino acid content, like meats. Generally, people are less hungry on those than they are on calorie matched diets of fruits and vegetables and carbohydrates, because when the insulin goes up, you get hungry and you want to eat more. So this is not a push for carnivore or a push against one thing or the other. It's just, there are a lot of factors. But we know for sure that when you're fasted, or when you have low amounts of carbohydrate in your system, complex carbohydrate, your alertness is going to go up. Fast increases alertness and epinephrine for the sole purpose of getting you to go out and find food. Can you imagine if our ancestors got hungry and they were like, oh, I'm too tired to go find food? We wouldn't be here. It'd be like robots, or one of your alien buddies will be like running the planet. Dream. So I think that if you want to be alert, fasting or keeping complex carbohydrates to a minimum is very valuable. If you want to sleep and you want to be sleepy, ingesting foods that have a lot of tryptophan, which is the precursor to serotonin, so complex carbohydrates like rice and grains, turkey, white meats, those things do create a sense of sleepiness. However, there is a caveat, and this is one problem with the once a day meal, is that anytime you have a lot of food in the gut, you're increasing sleepiness because you're diverting blood to the gut. It's going to trigger the vagus to signal to the brain to shut down your system and utilize those nutrients, digest and utilize those nutrients. So I've done the once a day eating thing. The problem is I eat so much in that meal that I'm exhausted. And so it doesn't always lend itself well to the schedule. But so in a 6 or 8 hour eating block for me is a little bit better. I do eat carbohydrates. I'm probably one of the few people left on the West Coast that actually consumes carbohydrates and will say that out
I didn't know
loud.
people eat carbs anymore. That's weird.
They don't.
Where do you even find carbs
What do you
these
buy?
days?
Yeah, I like oatmeal. I like rice. The other time is if people are doing very high intensity weight training, they need to replenish glycogen.
Yeah. On the alertness side, I do feel like it's probably person dependent. For me, alertness, being alert makes my life better in a lot of ways, more than just the alertness itself. Like, for example, one of the things I discovered with fasting is that when I was training twice a day in jiu-jitsu, for example, and competing and so on, I performed way better at things that you traditionally would say you need carbs for, which is explosive movements and all that. I don't know if I actually perform better in terms of like the force of the explosion, the explosiveness. What I do know is the alertness resulted in me doing the technique more precisely.
That's the dopamine and epinephrine system in action. And there's there are some other just purely physical aspects to one diet versus the other that can be complicated. If you're ingesting carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, you're going to replenish glycogen, which is great, but they also tend to be bulky and fibrous. And I've never rolled jiu-jitsu, but running when you have a lot of bulky fibrous food in your gut or in your intestine, it can be a barrier. It can be uncomfortable. And so some people do really well on low carbohydrate, meat-rich diets because they're just not as bloated. They're not carrying as much water and other stuff. Carbohydrate carries a lot of water molecules with it. So there are aspects to being able to train and being really explosive because you feel light. One anecdote that really, again, I'm not encouraging any one particular kind of diet, but I have a friend who was in the SEAL teams. I happen to know a number of people in that community, and he told me that he did this very long fast. It was a fast that I think you get to eat a little bit of soup or broth, and there's like a bar or something, but it's like a 9-day thing. Mm-hmm. And he's a very strong athlete, and he said that on day 6 or 7, he was running up some hills or something while he was on deployment, and he felt amazing. He had kind of hit this other level. He was somebody who had boxed in the Naval Academy. He was somebody who knows and knew high output. And he felt like he discovered the 13th floor, that there was another floor to this performance space that he hadn't experienced except while he had fasted. And he said that was a remarkable clarity of mind, energy. It's a little bit of what you described. Mm-hmm. He described a kind of suppleness and explosiveness. So there's probably something there.
On which day?
At once he was in the 5th or 6th day of the fast.
See, this is the thing is I've never been there on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th day, that kind of thing. But when I just don't eat for 20 hours, many times through my training, the clarity, it's like you feel like everyone is moving super slowly, mm-hmm. and you're able to like dominate people you weren't able to before. It's like,
well, you might have slipped into or switched over rather into full ketosis. And ketogenic diets done properly can be great for people. The problem is if you do it wrong, you can really mess it up. I tried it once and I basically got psoriasis. I thought my scalp was going to fall off. I was like sloughing off all this. And then I stopped and I was taking the liquid ketones. And then all of a sudden I felt better again. But I was told that I just did it wrong.
Yes.
So I think there's a right way and a wrong way, and you have to get it right.
Definitely. And so I've experimented quite a bit with keto to see how my body feels and doing it the right way and following all the instructions. There's definitely a huge difference that, like, for example, one of the things I discovered, everyone always said this, but I tried this recently over the past year, is I started drinking when I don't feel great, if I'm fasting, bone broth, chicken bone broth.
Oh, yeah.
And for some reason, like magically, it could be, this is the other thing, the mind, I don't know, but it makes me feel really good.
Oh, well, it could be the salt. So, I mean, neurons, the action potential of neurons, as you know, is sodium's rushing into the cell. You need enough extracellular sodium in order for your brain and nervous system to function. And so salt, I mean, unless people have hypertension, salt is great. There was an article in Science Magazine about a decade ago about how salt had been demonized. And unless people have hypertension, provided you drink enough water, salt is great. You need sodium, magnesium, and potassium to function, mm-hmm. and for your nerve cells to work. I mean, people who overdrink water and don't consume enough electrolyte die. Mm-hmm. Now, hydration is really important. I know David's really into hydration. He's mentioned that a few times. I mean, hydrating properly is key. And so you definitely want to make sure that you're drinking enough water and getting enough electrolytes. We should have actually talked about that at the beginning, because that's going to keep your nervous system functioning well. And a lot of people, they'll get shaky or jittery and when they're fasting, and they'll think they need sugar.
Yeah.
And if they just put some salt in some water, they feel fine.
And like the other stuff, potassium, magnesium, whatever the other electrolytes are. But
those three. So, I mean, salt,
Salt
magnesium's good before sleep. Salt. I mean, this is a vast space, and we're kind of talking about the overlap between neurochemicals, hormones, and nutrition. And it's a fascinating space, and it's one that the academic community has gems within the textbooks. It hasn't really made it into the public sphere yet. And I think that's because people get so caught up in the, being, are you vegan or are you carnivore? And there's a vast space in between too that people can explore. Like, I'm not a competitive athlete, so I eat meat and I also eat vegetables and I eat fruits, and it's just about timing them. But I tend to eat carbohydrates when I want to be sleepy. I eat them at night. And everyone said that's the worst thing. You can't do that. You sleep great after eating a big bowl of pasta, I'll tell you.
And by